Our first speaker today is Antonio Spinelli. We're very fortunate to have Antonio with us. He's a senior advisor for electoral processes for the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance's IDA, Asia and Pacific Regional Program. Antonio is currently seconded to the Australian Election Commission, where he is responsible for shaping both strategic and operational thinking, bringing real-world experience from a variety of international electoral environments. Prior to joining the Asia and Pacific Regional Program in Canberra, Antonio managed International Ideas Office and programs in Nepal and South Asia, supporting the Institute's electoral processes, local governance, citizen engagement, and political representation and participation initiatives in this region. So Antonio, without further ado, over to you.
Thank you so much, John, and distinguished participants. On behalf of International IDEA, I would like to thank the Right to Freedom for the invitation and opportunity to speak at this event. I worked twice in Bangladesh. In 2008, I was in Dhaka for an assessment for the UN, an assessment of the photographic voter registration project. It was very interesting. And more recently, in last February, I was for about a month in Dhaka to, again, assess possible electoral assistance to the Election Commission of Bangladesh for the forthcoming elections, together between IDEA and UNDP. Unfortunately, the conditions didn't allow for the assistance to materialize. Moving to my presentations, I must say that, with only a few months left to the January 24 elections, concerns about its expected levels of integrity, inclusion, voter participation, safety, credibility, and legitimacy are rightly so steadily growing. And regrettably, changes to electoral integrity are not something new to Bangladesh. Despite several credible elections that were consecutively held between 1991 and 2008, electoral integrity started to decline in 2014 to further deteriorated in 2018. So these two last cycle of elections lacked a level playing field, transparency, fairness, and they were characterized by multiple irregularities, by allegations of widespread fraud and intimidation, by low levels of voter turnout, restricted electoral observation, and by the worst electoral violence that the country experienced since the start of its democratization process in 1991. And so, although its political system and the legal framework provide for elections to be held regularly, Bangladesh electoral processes reveal inherent fragility and remain tenaciously beset by some systemic deficiencies. So left unaddressed, one election to the next, these deficiencies have led to a sharp decline in public confidence in the government's ability to hold credible and competitive elections. And despite the existence of a constitutionally independent electoral management body, the Election Commission is perceived and accused to lack independence. And so no matter if real or just perceived, the lack of independence has seriously tarnished the Commission's reputation. So looking at the forthcoming election, there are several reasons to be concerned. Should it lack basic levels of integrity and credibility, the country could be facing another 5 years of deeply polarized, confrontational, acrimonious, and often violent politics. And in turn, the protracted political stalemate could continue to have serious economic and social repercussions in the country, with the potential of a further democratic setback that both Bangladesh and its people can and no longer want to afford. So considering that this stalemate persisting since 2008, discussion about electoral reform are also not new to the country. There have been repeated assessments, and they were followed by repeated calls for electoral reforms. for electoral reform, suggesting ways to enhance the integrity of elections, legally, procedurally, operationally, as well ways to make them more independently and professionally managed. So yet, we have only little more than 2 months left to the scheduled date. So the 2024 election will be delivered without any substantial reform. So as the key causes for electoral integrity deficit have been left unaddressed, it is difficult to imagine that the next election, one, will be meeting acceptable integrity standards, and two, its outcome will be credible and thus broadly trusted and accepted by all stakeholders. So unless both the political and electoral dimensions of unavoidable reforms are addressed, a credible and trusted electoral system cannot be established. So the key question to be answered at this event is how could Bangladesh electoral deficit be possibly overcome? Regrettably, in the current state of political affairs, there are not too many options on the table. One of the few, if not the only, would be that of a political reset, considering that the comprehensive overhaul of the country political electoral systems would require to break with the present political deadlock, with the legacy of this deadlock. So first and foremost, before any technical reform can be defined, agreed upon and implemented, overcoming Bangladesh election integrity deficit requires political maturity and committed action by the contending political actors. As elections are partly political and partly technical processes, addressing any major technical process that is causing electoral deficiencies requires political will, political compromise, and political consensus. Therefore, seeking to reform elections in isolation from the broader political ecosystem is going to be ineffective, short-lived, and probably meaningless. And so with these considerations in mind, we can assume that no comprehensive, credible, and actionable reform is possible in Bangladesh unless the main political parties set the differences aside once for all and engage in genuine dialogue and negotiations. They shift the priority from seeking to retain or grab political power to instead promote a culture of cooperation and compromise for the good of the nation and the good of its people. And they reach a consensus on what needs to happen to overcome the multiple long-standing and deeply rooted deficiencies that are marring the integrity of election in Bangladesh. So while the political part is undeniably the hardest to overcome, political will, consensus, and compromise are prerequisites that would pave the way to viable legal and technical reform. So proposed reforms have been very thoroughly debated and also are nothing new. But they could include, for example, if the political will and compromise, etc., was to be found, ensuring greater independence of the election commission from political influence. This could be addressed in two ways. First, improving the structural independence of the Electoral Commission by strengthening the legal framework to provide more safeguard for its autonomy. And second, by enhancing what we call the idea behavioral independence. So by instilling in the EC an ethical culture of fearless independence, in that they do not bend in their behavior to any governmental, political, or any other partisan influences. It could be to reduce the occurrence of irregularities in voting and counting processes by assisting the EC to both enhance the professional skills for the unintentional irregularities of the staff, or the ethical behavior of the staff for deliberate irregularities. Establish a robust code of conduct, nothing new. ensure transparent campaign financing laws that reduce the influence of money in politics and ensure a level playing field for all parties, strengthen the judiciary independence to ensure that the electoral disputes are resolved impartially and timely, guarantee media freedom and access, and promote a diverse media landscape to provide a platform for all political perspectives. Take measures to minimize political violence and ensure the safety of voters, candidates, and election observers during the elections. Encourage civic engagement and civil society participation in monitoring and advocating for monitor elections and advocating for electoral integrity. Promote civic education to empower citizens to participate in the democratic process, to understand their rights and make an informed choice. Engage in public awareness campaigns to rebuild public trust in the electoral system that has been lost in the AC, and to encourage citizens to actively participate in elections. And finally, seek international assistance to help ensure that the electoral processes meet international standards. And so for all these reforms to happen, to conclude, it may be necessary, to draw a line in the current political situation, the current political system, and allow all the stakeholders, the government, the political parties, the civil society, and international actors to collaborate in the definition and implementation of an electoral reform roadmap, and together work towards the achievement of a shared vision of democratic elections that in Bangladesh that enjoy high levels of integrity and also high levels of public trust. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Antonio, and thanks for kicking off today's discussion so well.